Week 4, Lesson 1, World Issues. June 1938, Superman was introduced to the public in Action Comics number 1. September 1939, war was declared in Europe. As most of you probably know, this war would become known as World War II. At this time in the history of comic books, it becomes impossible to separate the comic book industry from the political and economic situations of the time. World War II became so massive that it affected almost every aspect of people's lives. Feeling disappointed over its participation in World War I, America was going through what is known as its isolationist phase, where it tried to disconnect itself with the problems of the rest of the world. This concerned some civilians who didn't like what was going on in Europe. What was happening in Europe? Hitler and the German war machine. Germany, after losing World War I, was desperate and in economic ruins. Over a decade, the Nazi Party slowly gained power until it succeeded in implementing a totalitarian dictatorship. They managed to justify their cause by promoting racial purity and by blaming the Jews for the trouble that Germany was facing. Hatred of the Jews was nothing new. There are thousands of years of history dealing with discrimination of the Hebrew people, going from their time in Egypt up until today. But Hitler and the Nazis took that hatred to the next level. It wasn't enough to scoff at them and keep them in the lower classes. Jews were identified, rounded up, put into ghettos, and most actions against them were legalized or encouraged. Now, if you're a Jewish person in America during the 1930s and hear about the horrors that are going on in Europe, you might question America's isolationist policies. This was the case for many comic book writers and artists who were Jewish, and wanted to change America's minds about staying out of the war. It's also important to remember that during the start of World War II, comics were not seen as exclusively kids' entertainment. They had a diverse audience that were being well read by people in their 20s and 30s. When they finally did enter the war, many soldiers brought or had comics mailed to them and left them with the people that they liberated, which meant that other countries became exposed to the medium and helped promote its growth. America was slowly coming out of the Great Depression and mobilizing for a war in Europe. All of a sudden, the problems of America started to change. It wasn't gangsters that could destroy your neighborhood, it was enemy spies. The threats became more melodramatic and over the top. A lot of this was because of Hitler's persona and the unexpected success of the Germans in their war in Europe. Hitler was a larger-than-life villain, and we still see this in his legacy today. He was such a threat to the world's way of life that we've simplified him into a one-dimensional yelling asshole. And this was also seen in the comics. Heroes had to fight bigger and tougher enemies that were easier to hate. Remember the early adventures of Superman? He fought car manufacturers, legitimate business owners, and gangsters. And, if you recall the Dick Tracy video, gangsters were not universally hated in America. Nazis, on the other hand, didn't have the type of support that gangsters did. Comics followed that trend. The villains became more over the top and had little to no complexity about them. Superman was soon fighting giant robots, which were more of a match for his powers than the average thug on the street. But it didn't stop there. Let's look at the cover to Action Comics number 35. We see Superman standing before a German gunner, uninjured by his bullets. I think it's safe to say that the artist didn't know what blitzkrieg tactics were, and thought that Europe was still fighting in mostly trench warfare. This sure looks like a story where Superman went to Europe to protect the Allies. But this was released in April 1941, 8 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor forced America to enter the war. Now you might think that there's a story in this issue where Superman goes to Europe, but nothing like this happens at all in the issue. He just fights some crooks. Okay, jump ahead 5 months to September 1941. We see Superman giving the German tank an uppercut, knocking it off its treads. Just like the previous cover, this one has nothing to do with what is actually inside the book. It's the writers preparing to get the public opinion against the Nazis. There is also one huge example of Superman's creators showing their views on totalitarian powers in Europe. This was a 2-page story made in 1940 for Look magazine. In this story, Superman single-handedly goes to Europe, destroys the Nazi war machine, captures Hitler, and then goes the extra step to go to Russia and capture Stalin, and bring them both back to the League of Nations to stand trial for their part in modern history's greatest crime: unprovoked aggression against defenseless countries. Of course, anyone who has heard the name Hitler knows that the war did not end that way, and that Stalin was never held accountable for his part in invading Poland. This story, like Superman, was a simple fantasy. But, despite standing for truth, justice, and the American way, Superman wouldn't even become known as the greatest American patriot when it came to promoting the war effort. That title belonged to a character written by another two young Jewish men who were also sons of European immigrants. We'll look at that American icon in the next video. So, to sum up what you can expect to see this week, we'll look at the characters that were created for the main purpose of supporting the war effort, and how existing characters were altered to help promote it. This part of the Golden Age is usually downplayed by publishers of the characters, and, because of this, is overlooked by many fans. Well, there are understandable reasons for this. It is a hugely influential time in comics and demands close examination to see how the trends of being pro-war completely overtook the industry.